The global insurance industry is more than a market.
It's a movement powered by 3 million professionals around the world.
Together, we support communities as they rebuild after disaster.
Help businesses through risk and uncertainty.
Protect individuals as they plan for brighter futures.
This impact isn't possible without people.
That's why we attract, grow, and retain the very best talent.
Because when every voice is heard,
when every person feels they belong,
we don't just build careers.
We build a better tomorrow.
Belonging builds 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 tomorrow.
Good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to welcome you all to today's session on gender inclusion, shaping the future of the insurance industry. My name is Jake Arundel, and as Inclusion and Diversity Manager for Gallagher, I'm honoured to open this important conversation. The insurance industry is built on the principles of trust, resilience and adaptability, values that are not only critical to the services we provide, but also the cultures we want to foster. Today, we're here to discuss a topic that is imperative for the future of our industry: gender inclusion. Progression in our profession, and indeed any industry, is shaped by more than just individual ambition. It requires inclusive cultures, supportive leadership, and visible role models who inspire and pave the way for others. Yet, we know that barriers still exist, barriers that prevent us from fully realizing the potential of our talent pool. This session is an opportunity to explore those barriers and, more importantly, the potential solutions. We'll hear from a gender-balanced panel of leaders and change makers who will share their journeys, their challenges and insights. These stories will not only highlight the transformative impact of inclusive practices, but also remind us of the work that still needs to be done. Why is this so important for the insurance industry? Inclusion and diversity practices are not just moral imperatives, they are business imperatives. Research consistently demonstrates that diverse teams are more innovative, more effective, and better equipped to meet the needs of an increasingly diverse client base. In a world where risks are evolving at an unprecedented rate, we cannot afford to leave any talent or perspective untapped. So as we begin today's session, I encourage you to listen, engage, and reflect on how we can each contribute to a more inclusive and equitable future in our industry. I'd like to finish by thanking you all for being here, and I'll hand over to Gillie to get us started.
Thanks, Jake, and good morning, everybody. It's such an honour to be here. I had such great fun at Dive-In last year. I'm pretty nosy. I loved exploring all the different offices that surrounded mine in the city. But this morning, we're joining you from the comfort of our own home. So as I said, my name's Gillie Fairbrother. My pronouns are she, her. I am Global Responsible Business Officer at Davies Group. That means I look after everything from our environmental impact. I look after our charitable foundation. And I also look after cultural initiatives such as our employee resource groups. And gender equity is a topic that I'm hugely passionate about. And I'm really excited that we're joined by an excellent panel today. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. From a housekeeping perspective, you can see the Slido on the screen. There's a QR code there. I'm going to give you a moment to scan that. I have lots of screens open, but there is a Q&A. We will get to some questions at the end, but if things pop up throughout while we're having a discussion, feel free to pop those in. Also, one of my jobs is to get our learning objectives up on the screen. So I will pop back to that Slido again in a moment so you can get that QR code scanned. But first, I'd like like to hand over to our panel to do a better job than me of introducing themselves and moving around in alphabetical order. I'll start with Hal, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I nearly didn't come off mute there. My name's Hal Shaw, pronouns are he, him, and I am a senior broker and director at Aon. Really lovely to be on the panel. Should I hand back to you, Gillie, or a little bit more on me?
Nope, that's great.
Perfect.
I'm
Thank
sure
you.
we're going to hear a lot more from you earlier. Coming to Karen now.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here. My name is Karen Cargill. I sit within the management liability team at Marsh, where I am the Chief Client Officer and D&O product lead. I've been at Marsh for almost 5 years, and I'm here because I have a passionate interest in this topic.
Brilliant. Thanks, Karen. Welcome. And Leslie, my colleague at Asta.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Leslie Edmonds. I'm the Operations Director at Asta. I've been there for around 4 years, and prior to that I was in Lloyd's for 16 and then in the company market for 8 before that. I was really keen to participate in this panel. We've done so much in the industry already, but there's still so much more to do. So I want to see if I can get some tips and be inspired by my fellow panel members. And I look forward to the questions that are coming in from the audience.
Wonderful. Thanks, Leslie. And Simon.
Hi, good morning, all. Simon White from AXA XL. Pronouns he and him. I've been at AXA XL for about 17 years. I'm currently the director of our Delegated Authority Service Centre. I've worked in the financial services sector for about 30 years now, and I've a real interest in this topic because I feel as a leader I have a responsibility to help shape the future of our industry. So delighted to be on the panel.
Wonderful. Thanks, Simon. I'm really looking forward to the parts of the conversation we have coming up about allyship. And finally, Yetunde, if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. My name's Yetunde, and I sit within the M&A litigation and tax team at Gallagher. I am probably the insurance newbie on the panel, having been with Gallagher for 2.5 years and not in insurance before that. I have become involved in various initiatives to encourage the development of female leaders within Gallagher and the insurance industry. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation and sort of learning from the experience of others.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Welcome all. So we're going to get stuck into our questions, and we have a lot to get through today. So I'm going to do my best to keep us on track while letting the discussion flow. And the first question is really about setting the scene. So I'd like to know a bit more about your journey into insurance and how gender has shaped your experience. I'm probably not going to get to everyone. We've got quite a big panel. But coming to Karen first, I'd love to hear about your journey into the industry and how gender has shaped your experience.
Thank you. So I've always been an insurance expert, but I actually started with a career in law. I didn't fall into insurance. I think often when you ask people about their career journeys and we talk about insurance, they sort of giggle nervously and self-deprecatingly and then say, I fell into it. I definitely didn't fall into it. I chose it. I did what would have then, I think is still called an insurance seat, sort of 6 months experience. And I absolutely loved it. And I always had an interest or a curiosity or nosiness, you could call it, for business and the commercial world, and it gave real variety and offered an opportunity to find out a lot and explore the business world. I have had quite a multifaceted career, so I've worked in a law firm, I've been on secondment as a manager, I've worked in an insurance company, and I've settled in insurance broking. So I'm now, as I say, at Marsh. In the early part of my career, in terms of gender, I'd say I felt it quite keenly. It was a bit more overt. I can remember, it's actually a legal anecdote, but going to a hearing with a QC when I was quite junior and him patting me on the head and smiling benignly and saying, oh, I've got a little woman. I haven't changed much. You can imagine how annoyed I was by that. I think things have moved on. There's certainly been some progress, but I still think that there is a bit of work to be done. And I think if we look at the stats and listen to this conversation today, that we'll agree on that. That's me.
Yeah. Definitely. It's great to hear that you chose insurance, and hopefully through some of this messaging we can get younger people to start choosing insurance. I'm seeing Hal nodding. So can I come to you next about your journey and how gender has taken a part in that?
Yeah, thanks, Gillie. When I left university in 2010, there weren't a lot of jobs going. So I actually fell into recruitment. I wasn't one of these people who planned a graduate, hiring, I wasn't organized enough for that. So did recruitment for about 18 months. And then I knew I wanted to go into some sort of broking role and had various interviews, oil and gas and diamonds and all sorts of other things, but ended up getting a job at Aon, and I'm still at Aon 13 and a half years later. So I have had, I think I'm on my 5th different role at Aon. I've sort of bounced around the place and done, I think interesting things. I am a bit of an insurance nerd. I bore my wife regularly about the fun of insurance. I'm actually changing jobs soon as well. And I went on a walk with my mum recently and explained her the intricacies of my new job. And she's been teasing me about how quickly she switched off. So a little bit of an insurance nerd. And I, thinking about the topic here, Gillie, I think gender had played a massive role in my career journey, but I think my journey of discovery around diversity and inclusion. I'm a white, middle-class, cisgendered man. I went to a boarding school. I think all of that, when I reflect back on it, has, of course, had an impact on who I am as a person today. I first became an ally when a sibling came out as bisexual, and I investigated becoming an ally in the Pride Alliance group. And through my siblings' journey and the journey we kind of went on as a family around that, I really started to think about how gender had impacted my life. And I think there's an overused phrase about masculinity and toxic masculinity, but I do think the insurance market traditionally was standing in Leadenhall Market drinking pints and doing deals on the back of fag packets, etc. And at the start of my career, I thought that was fantastic. I thought Christmas had come early, quite frankly. But I actually stopped drinking 10 years ago. That's been a whole journey as well. And how has my masculinity played into that journey? We don't have time to get into that right now, but through allyship, I then ended up running what was the Women's International Network, BRG at Aon. We actually changed the name of that during my tenure as the co-chair to the Gender IQ Network. And I've just constantly tried to challenge myself, educate myself around gender and how it affects my day-to-day interactions within the business. And then more broadly, I guess, as I've moved through the business, become a little bit more senior, use that privilege that I have to call out bad behavior, to mentor young women in particular, I would say, and, just try and raise awareness of the impacts that gender has throughout insurance. So I think that's probably a quick synopsis. I don't want to take up too much time with other people's, really want to hear other journeys. So I'll hand back to you, Gillie.
No, that's great. And I think it's so great to hear about that active allyship and the fact that you mentioned privilege and, it doesn't have to be worn as a badge of shame, right? And the fact that you talk about using that privilege as a bigger power to influence. And I think maybe mentoring the young women, but also mentoring the young men so we can build that allyship. I'd like to come to Leslie now about your journey, but also maybe a little bit more about how the industry has changed over time and what impact that's had.
Okay. Well, I got lucky with my first job, despite my gender. The manager was only looking for men for the role because they needed to fill some spots on the cricket team. But thankfully, my first name is spelled I-E at the end, and that's traditionally the boys' way to spell it. So that's why I managed to get an interview.
Wow.
So I got into insurance despite my gender. And then at Allianz, I didn't really notice gender as a feature in my work life. But that all changed when I came to the Lloyd's market in my late 20s. It was a real culture shock. At the beginning of the meetings, men would kiss me, they would shake hands with my male colleagues, and that was a bit weird. I thought didn't happen at Allianz. I'd often be the only woman in a room full of 10 men, my job was going around all the managing agents. And whenever anybody swore, they'd apologise to me. Wouldn't apologise to anybody else in the room, just me, like I was some kind of little China doll that needed to be protected and not a business person. And it made me feel awkward and different, which I hadn't really felt before. There was also a thing around the tea and coffee, and I seemed to be always pouring the tea and coffee. And I did that up until the point where I read Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In book. And that really made me think, no, I'm perpetuating this role. I've got to stop it. But anyway, I'm glad I persevered through because it improved so much over the years. And I noticed a real step change, certainly in my workspace, when Inga Beale took over as the first female CEO of Lloyd's. She showed that was just a different way of doing things. And now I'm really proud to work for Asta, which is the biggest managing agent at Lloyd's, and we've got more women than men on the board, so we need to pay attention to that. But we've got one of the only female CEOs in the market and a good gender mix at all levels. And I'd say that I was lucky to get there, but it wasn't just luck. It was a bit of luck, but I really actively sought a job there because I was attracted to the culture. I wanted to work for a company that had really believed in inclusion and had it in their DNA, and it wasn't just hollow statements on a website, which we see a lot. So I think companies who get this right are definitely able to attract better talent. And so back to what Jay said at the beginning, it's not just a moral imperative, it's a business imperative to get this right.
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, it's such an incredible journey. And when I think about my grandmother as a suffragette and how can I tell her what progress we've made, when you talk about people picking CVs based on names, you know, it's encouraging to think we have come somewhere. I know we still have a lot of way to go. Yetunde, I'd love to hear a bit more about your story.
Sure. Well, I'm like Karen, I did sort of fall into insurance. I as I mentioned, joined Gallagher about 2 years ago, and that was my first insurance role. I studied law at university, and I came out of university not entirely sure that I wanted to practice law, and kind of found myself sort of paralegaling and doing various sort of legal services roles, which over the years evolved into various sort of legal services related roles. And prior to joining Gallagher, I was at a litigation funder for about 5 years, and there I did a variety of roles, including investment and legal operations. And that was a role that I really enjoyed. That was a business that I really enjoyed being in. But, you know, as oftentimes all good things do come to an end, and actually I was reached out to by a member of my current team who said, look, how do you feel about joining insurance? And actually another insurer had reached out to me previously, and I had specifically said, look, I don't want to work in insurance. And actually sort of I sat down one evening and said, why have I said that I don't want to work in insurance? Like, what is it about insurance that I categorically decided I don't want to do? And I think part of it was I just didn't see people like me in insurance. I didn't think this was a place that sort of necessarily was for me. It's never been an industry that was on my radar. And it just hadn't sort of resonated with me as a potential option. And, you know, I hadn't explored it to discount it, but because I hadn't actively chosen it, I had just sort of said, look, I don't think that's for me. And when, as I say, the team at Gallagher reached out to me, and they made a really compelling case as to why I should join their team and why I was what they were looking for their team. And I went to meet them, and actually sort of my impression changed. And I spoke to other people that I knew who had joined insurance from my previous company, and they all spoke really positively about Gallagher and about the industry. And actually that was for me what really made the case to join the team. And I'll say, to be honest, having joined the team and now been there for 2.5 years, I haven't looked back. It's been a fantastic experience. I think one of the things I sort of struggled with, particularly in preparing for today's presentation, is the fact that obviously I haven't seen perhaps the changes over the last 10, 15, 20 years. I've come in at a time where I think actually there's a lot more consciousness, a lot more recognition of the need for sort of a gender balance and more gender inclusion. And perhaps I've been a beneficiary of that, which is probably something that I can talk about. I will be honest and say I don't think necessarily that I've struggled as much as some others might have done. But then again, perhaps that's a testament to the work that has been done over the years to try and make progress in this area.
Yeah, I mean, that's only encouraging to hear, and I know we've got further discussions coming later about attracting and retaining talent. So thanks so much for sharing that, and I think it gives us all a little bit of hope. I'm sort of ready to move on, but I don't want to leave Simon out. Is there anything else you wanted to mention about sort of your journey and how gender has shaped, just bouncing off what Yetunde just mentioned?
I think I certainly resonate and appreciate a lot of what Hal has said and what a lot of Yetunde has said. And I'm from, I guess, I've lived in a female household since sort of my early teen years. I've got 2 daughters now, a wife. The only sort of male I've lived with for many years is my Springer Spaniel dog. So I've got a vested interest in ensuring that the industry is moving in the right direction. I've got quite a lot of examples of bad practice from the past sort of 30 years, some of which I can share at the sort of the right point during this. But really, it's kind of, it's the allyship, the bit that I really want to ensure I am actively part of the change. And as a leader, that I'm really developing diverse teams, because the empirical evidence is overwhelming. Teams that have gender diversity outperform the ones that don't. And so as a leader in an insurance business, that is completely my reason for wanting to really be part of that change. And, I've had early on, my first insurance role was for a female CEO, and I witnessed sort of a lot of what has been described as, I guess, outdated behaviour, and to see her navigate that with such sort of skill, pragmatism, and bring along female leaders under her was really, really inspiring. And that's one of the reasons why I've been a mentor to some of our female colleagues. I was really inspired by what she brought to our organisation and to the industry.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, looking forward to discussing more of that earlier. And I think getting a bit more into that, how do we actively engage those allies? And I mean, the people that are probably not on this call, right? The people that haven't seen this, they're interested in it, the ones that haven't thought about it, because that's where we're going to start to action change. So sort of moving on now onto this diverse talent pool we keep talking about, and Yetunde's amazing story about her entry into the industry. But I think we'll probably all agree there's still barriers in attracting that talent. So I want to come to Leslie, thinking about Lorraine Harford as your female CEO of Asta. Obviously, you're doing a great job there, and you've got a lot of gender balance across the industry. But when we see this sort of bias hiring, we've got Lorraine, and then we've got lots of female leaders as well, which is absolutely great. I'd love to know a bit more about what barriers you think we have attracting this diverse talent, and how you've perhaps handled that in your life at work.
So I think, one of the biggest barriers we have is that women just find some of the key technical roles in our industry really unappealing. The issue goes right back to school and subject choices, and there's the percentages of girls choosing to specialise in STEM subjects, which underpin a lot of our roles, is much lower than boys. So my daughter's looking at unis at the moment, and so I've been looking at some stats, and only about a third of maths grads in 2025 were women, and it's worse for technology, where the proportion is less than 20%. And that's going to be a real problem, I think, for the future of our industry, if we can't get at those talented women with potential, because AI and tech is already becoming a central pillar to our business strategies. And if women aren't training, if they're not upskilling, if they're not even interested in AI and technology, then they're going to miss out on senior management and board positions, and diversity is going to become even more difficult to achieve. We talked about the research that shows that diverse companies are more successful. I think a lot of that is to do with the decision making and the input into the decision making. And if it's going to be AI agents and technology that's going to be making more of the decisions, then we need more women to play a part in developing those algorithms, those guardrails that everybody thinks are so important. So there's a lot of good female role models out there, but we just need more of them. So what I'd love to see is more women putting their hand up for AI training, asking to go on conferences, saying they want to be involved in the projects, and really leading the charge, so that we don't get into the position that I was in 2 weeks ago at the Bank of England, where there was 10 women in the room and 7 to 8 men, all talking about the future of this in our industry. I think that's probably the biggest thing that I see as the challenge for the future.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. And I think it's that early intervention piece, and maybe even getting in earlier at schools and having that conversation. I was noticing Yetunde was nodding a lot during that, so wanting to come to you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Leslie has said. And as I mentioned, sort of one of the issues I found, and perhaps that was, a preconceived sort of perception, was, are there people there that look like me? And therefore, do I belong? And even after I joined the business, there were days I'd look around the office and find that actually there were very few people that looked like me. And I think obviously we'll get on to the topic of intersectionality, because obviously that's a big part of my story. But I think, it has a circular impact. To attract talent that you want for the future, they're going to look at these businesses and think, oh, I'm not really sure this is for me, not many people there that look like me, maybe I'll go and work somewhere else. And then you don't get those people in, and the impact of that therefore compounds. So what can we do? And I think Leslie makes a good point, and I do believe that it starts younger at school level. A lot of industries are represented. You might have STEM subjects and law and people who want to go and do, lots of different careers. Is the insurance industry well represented at the kind of school leaver or careers decision stage to really help and encourage? And one of the things sort of I've tried to do since I have been at Gallagher is to really kind of put myself out there for entry-level employees, and really encourage them to kind of stay the course, and put myself out there as a representation, as an example of somebody who crosses over a number of sort of diversity metrics and says, look, this is me, I'm not your typical insurance hire, but look, I'm here and I'm doing it. What are your challenges? Let's have that discussion, and really encourage people to kind of stay in this industry and encourage others to join as well. But again, as Leslie said, I think that requires, women who are there, people who are sort of part of the gender diversity, being willing to put themselves out there and to be mentors and to encourage others. And I think that's the way you kind of, create the visibility that might encourage others to say, look, maybe there's something here for me.
Absolutely. I think it's totally that being visible, that engagement piece. And it's culture, right? So thinking about, you talk about retaining our because it's all right attracting it, but then if you haven't got the culture, it won't stick around. So I really want to hear from Simon a little bit more about what aspects of the workplace culture do you think helps retain a diverse talent that's equal in the industry?
Yeah, thanks, Gillie. And culture is obviously absolutely fundamental and central to having that diverse workplace, and to having a place where employees feel engaged, feel they've got a voice and they can make a difference. I think, firstly, the tone from the top, I think, is absolutely crucial. That's where culture starts from. I think that tone needs to be clear, consistent, and leadership teams really need to drive that culture. And the commitment has to be lived every day. It can't be something that is just confined to a set time of year or presentations. It needs to be absolutely embodied and lived. I do think, Leslie's touched on it, so has Yetunde, but it's vital to have that kind of evidence and role models. You can see people progressing throughout the organisation that are from those, diverse backgrounds, to show people, regardless of that, there are the opportunities, there are the prospects to develop in this industry. Expanding that a little bit further, I think that, male, female, whatever the gender diversity is, they've got an absolutely critical role in the organisation to really ensure that, the values, the culture is embodied, and that we're ensuring that we're progressing in the right direction. I think that it can, culture can help be supported by things like training programs, development programs. I think they play a large part in it, and the design of those. I think certainly the sort of the promotion and the progression of flexible working is also an important aspect. And, flexible remote working options, they allow people with different responsibilities, such as carers, such as parents, to balance those work and personal responsibilities. And, I think organisations with the right flexible working approach can help retain talent from those groups that might otherwise be excluded due to that sort of traditional 9 to 5 days a week in the office. I think that flexible working helps open up those opportunities. I also think, and this is certainly the experience in my own organisation, is that employee resource groups play a big part in helping drive the culture, and it's something that I'm actively participating in. And then I guess lastly, sort of, and it's less around the points I mentioned above, but certainly just, it's one thing having a policy, so say like a speak up policy. That's not something that should just be circulated, something that's referenced once a year. Employees should have the trust that if they do see some behaviour that is not aligned with the culture, with the behaviours that we want, that they trust that process is going to ensure that their voice is heard and that action can be taken.
Yeah. No, definitely. And not to sort of put you on the spot, but I'm really interested. We've talked about this. You started with the top-down tone. We've talked about the employee resource groups, which tends to be the voice from the bottom. It'd be great to get your thoughts on how do we get to the middle? And again, the people that are not on this call, that haven't chosen to come to this, any thoughts on that, or if anyone else wants to take Simon off the spotlight?
I'm happy to have a go at answering. Yeah, I think it's kind of the visibility of some of these programs and having the right membership of it and having, I think, fairly clear objectives. I think one of the things in our organisation that's quite evident is, as a leader, it helps to have that senior sponsorship for the resource groups. That, I think, helps it helps drive the sort of flow of people going to those organisations. As speaking to the leaders in our organisation, they have a responsibility to unlock funding to ensure that these groups, they don't just have objectives, but they're able to achieve those objectives by unblocking certain things that might be preventing them from doing it, and whether that be funding, whether it be advertising in the right way within our organisation, and just trying to ensure that they're delivering the right engagement and the right platform.
Definitely, yeah. And I think, not to sort of throw devil's advocate into the room, but sometimes it's people just don't want to engage with this stuff, and I wonder how we deal with that. Perhaps it's something we can touch on later. Leslie, did you have any thoughts on this about culture and how that makes that retention piece a little more easier?
Yeah, I do. I always think about culture as the 10 feet around you. So that means the way that people are treated every day, the decisions you make every day about how people are included or not included. And the reason I feel so strongly about that is it comes from an employee engagement session that I ran years ago, when I asked everybody to rate the factors that made them feel the most engaged at work. I was wondering, is it recognition? Is it being trusted, learning new things? Is it all about the communication? It was a mixture of different things for everybody, but the one thing that was the most commonly highly weighted, and it didn't matter whether it was what the gender was or the ethnicity, it was just the same for everybody, was involvement. And when we delved a bit more deeply into what does that actually mean, people were saying things like, I want to be invited to meetings about things that impact me. I want somebody to come and ask me my opinion for something and then see that it's built into decisions or plans. I want to make sure that I'm on the list for these training and advancement opportunities. It's not just a certain group of favoured people over there. I want to make sure that I can come along to the team meetings. So please don't hold them at 9 o'clock in the morning when I can't get until 9:30. I want to be able to come along to social events. So can we have some at lunchtime, please? So it was all those little daily things that impact your life that all add up together to make people feel involved and included. And I think that those are the things that help us retain people in a business. So the important thing for everybody as leaders, as colleagues, I would say, is to really challenge ourselves about who's getting opportunities. Is it the same people all the time? Who's being missed out? Why are they being missed out? It might be because they don't have similar interests, so they don't get invited on the nights out where all the real strategy happens. It might be, as Simon was saying, around flexible working and caring responsibilities. So I think the key thing for me is always just thinking about those everyday decisions, really.
Yeah, and that is what culture is, right? It's your everyday interactions with everyone in the business, which is why it can feel like a great beast to tame or manage, because it's everybody's responsibility. It's not HR, it's not my job looking after culture, it's every single person and how we interact with people on a daily basis. All right, I could dive into all of these so much, but sort of wanting to move on because we have lots of questions to get through, and we haven't heard from Karen in a while, so I'm going to hop over to you. So how can we ensure that gender inclusion efforts are intersectional and inclusive of other identities? I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Hi again. So I'm hoping that people understand what intersectionality is, but just briefly, it's where you have more than one. If you were talking employment, you'd be talking protected characteristics. So it may be that you're disabled, it may be that you're Black, it may be that you're female. And I think it's really important to understand intersectionality, not just theoretically, but as it impacts your colleagues and the people that you're working with. So, for example, I am female, I am a Black woman, I would be regarded, I think, as working class. My dad died when I was quite young, but he was a builder. My mother worked in a care home. So a number of what you'd call protected characteristics, intersectional identities. They're also just me. They are indivisible parts of my whole. They're just who I am. And I think one of the things that I've noticed is that we often shy away from difficult topics. So some things are easier to talk about others. In my experience, we often like talking about gender. It's much more difficult to talk about, say, race or neurodivergence or disability. And so one of my key things about how we make it more inclusive is simply talking to each other and really trying to understand the experience of people who are intersectional. So I would say more open discussions, reverse mentoring, having those hard conversations and openly acknowledging the challenges that people who are intersectional in their identities face. So, for example, I was in an event where they were talking about pay parity. And the discussion was generally around how long it would take to achieve pay equality for women. And I think the answer was 50 years. And I made the point that it isn't the same for ethnic minority women. In fact, it isn't even the same for all ethnic minority women. It does vary in between, say if you're talking about Asian women or you're talking about Black women. So just understanding and acknowledging that there are those additional challenges. And then it's a bit of the last point for me is that it's a bit of a theme for me today, but it's about being intentional and deliberate in our efforts. So a friend of mine made a point recently, and it really struck with me that it's not enough just to talk about inclusion. You've got to be intentional in building an inclusive environment, and it's easy to miss that. So again, I often go to kind of gender events. We have balance events here at Marsh, and I was one not that long ago. We were all sitting around and, there were lots of women there. It was quite a high performing group, and we were all congratulating each other on how inclusive we were. And then I looked around the room and thought, well, it isn't actually really particularly inclusive. We have lots of people, but there are lots of women here, there are lots of white women here, but there weren't particularly disabled women there. There certainly weren't many ethnic minorities. I think I was probably the only one or one of two. And again, I understand those are hard points to make, but I think that if we are just a little bit more open and intentional in being the change that we want to see. You know, if we do not see these things, then we cannot assist in changing them. So I would just say communication and action would be my key points.
Thank you, Karen. And I just want to reiterate on that action. I think, we probably all go to a lot of these things all the time, and we run the risk of talking and not walking. And I think we will get at the end of this some practical action tips that you can take away from this and do something and make a difference rather than just the talking about it. Yetunde, I did want to come to you because I know you mentioned intersectionality earlier, so I'd love to hear from you briefly on this as well.
To be completely honest, Karen has said every single point that I would have made on this, absolutely perfectly articulated. I actually don't think I could add anything to what she has already said. I would just echo the point that, I agree. I feel like some conversations, it feels like, are a bit more difficult to have than others. And, one of the things that I feel, as Karen said, sort of, I can't divide the fact that I am Black and female. I am both of those things. So whilst I am female, my experience is also lived through being Black as well. And they are indivisible parts of who I am. And therefore, my experience as a female is not necessarily the same as somebody who might be white and female, somebody who might be white, disabled and female. So I think it's really having those conversations and being willing to have those uncomfortable, perhaps, discussions that I feel sometimes perhaps there is a bit of an emphasis on a single track sort of gender inclusion. But actually, if you unpick that, what does that actually really mean? Who are the people that we're saying we're trying to include? Are they all the same? Do they all come from the same background with exactly the same experience? And therefore, a one size fits all will fix everybody and fix every problem that we have. So nothing to add, Karen, just to say, thank you so much. I think perfectly articulated.
Could I just quickly, before we move on, could I just add quickly one point? We're obviously talking about barriers as well. So we are talking about barriers to progression. So we're often talking about the negative aspects or the way in which these things have held us back. But I do also want to be absolutely clear that for most people who do have, intersectional characteristics, these are also things that we're very proud of. They are unique aspects of our personality. And I think that one of the things that I've really loved over the last few years is this emphasis on authenticity and being your authentic self. And those unique characteristics, whatever they are, you bring them to work, they are a part of you, and they can add something different, a different dimension to your career. So it's really important to lean into the positives of those things as well, and for all of us to see how they can add diversity to your workplace.
Yeah, thank you both so much. And just, thinking about that uniqueness, that not one size fits all, there is not going to be one solution. And I think as we deepen our conversation into allyship, I think it's about that permission to be curious, to ask questions and not be afraid to get it wrong. Because if you think about it, if you're saying something with a good intention, you might get it wrong, but you're not trying to cause offense. And I think it will be clear to anyone that you're there to try and learn more. So I'd really encourage everyone to be more curious, to ask those questions with a good intention that you want to help, and see where they take you, because you'll learn things that you never expected. All right, so we've talked a lot about these barriers, about this, how we retain talent, about culture. I want to shift more towards progression and leadership now. So thinking about how we might have struggled to progress, what maybe non-traditional alternatives there are to pursue in order to get that progression. And we haven't heard from Hal for a while, so I'm coming to you.
Thanks, Gillie. I've just been absolutely loving, nodding like a donkey as usual when I join these events. What all the speakers have been saying. I was reflecting, I went to a dive-in event 9-10 years ago, right at the start of dive-in. And it was a very senior woman in the market talking about her career progression had been a jungle gym, not a ladder. And that's always really stuck with me, in this kind of idea of non-traditional climbing of seniority. And certainly my career, I've always maybe a little bit of Toad Hall. I've gone to the next shiny thing. So I started in recruitment, as I said, had a claims job. Then I was in the States for a while and in Singapore, came back, moved into product recall and contamination, looking after food clients. Most recently, I've been doing medical malpractice. I'm leaving Aon to go to an MGA, to start up an MGA. So for me, I've done sort of dotted around, and I haven't had, and look, if you have a linear career, I'm not calling that out. That is absolutely an option, just to, become more senior and expert at what you do. But for me, I've sort of tried to gather different skills together. And I think in a big organization, an Aon, a Marsh, an AXA XL, a Gallagher, actually going and gathering different skills allows you to build a really big network. And then it gives you visibility to senior leaders that you might not otherwise interact with. And then what I would go further and say is, when I was co-chairing the Gender Network for 5 years, that again gave me access to leaders maybe that I wouldn't ordinarily come across in my sort of day-to-day broking job. And I was then invited to join what was called the Regional Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee, which was a group of all the senior leaders in the UK with 2 representatives from the business, trying to actually put in, specific targets around how do we move, not just gender, but all those points that Karen and Yetunde have talked about, recruitment. How can we actually move the dial here, and holding those senior leaders to account, actually. And that was an amazing experience for me, probably the first time I've been in minuted meetings, with an actual secretary and having to attend on a regular basis, etc. The other 2 things I've probably done that I would call out is I've always found it frustrating in broking and underwriting, no doubt as well, that, what happens is someone senior leaves, the next most senior broker moves up, they have no inkling on or interest in managerial, what it is to be a good manager. They're just the next most senior person, and being a very good broker is maybe different from being a very good manager. So I complained about that for many years. I then became a manager, or was looking to become a manager, and I went and tried to upskill myself using the Chartered Management Institute, which Aon paid for me to become a chartered manager. And then I've also done a lot of external volunteer work. Most recently, I joined the board of governors for a local primary school. And again, for me, that's just about, it's holding senior leadership to account within a school setting, but it's about how can I upskill myself internally, externally? How can I build a network to move my career forward? And one final piece, and this is sort of maybe moving into the advice that we're going to get to later, practical things. Don't do any of that cynically. If you're just doing it because you're trying to climb the career ladder, that you can sniff that out a mile away, right? I became really interested in gender 10, 11 years ago, and that has been my passion, that I've pursued that interest probably, plus the volunteering stuff outside of work. But with that, I've also learned more about race and all that is intersectionality things. But when you see a senior leader sometimes who's, an exec sponsor of a group, you can just sniff it out when they're just doing that to tick a box. And I'm so against that. So you have to find things that you're interested, that you're passionate about, but then also maybe try and gather skills from outside of work, from outside of traditional roles. Thanks, Gillie. I'll hand it back to you. Hopefully there was something in there.
Absolutely. And I think it comes back to that intention piece, like why are you doing it? And if you're approaching things from a genuine way, it's even the culture piece, like we're going back to Leslie's 10-foot wide culture. If you care about your colleagues, you learn about them, who their kids are, where they've been on holiday, you want to help each other work together to achieve your common goal. And I think it is just that intention piece. All right, next question I'm going to ask in a slightly different way, because I know there's so many nuggets of great information I want to get out of this group. So I want to come to Karen, but I'm going to get you to give me some quick fire answers of why you think gender balance drops off at senior levels, and what we can do to change that.
It's a quick fire. I'll try and keep it quick. Do you know, just having said I'll keep it quick, just an aside. Just before I came in today, I was just looking at what proportion women are just globally, right? We're 50% of the world population, pretty much, right? And then I looked at what the Institute of Fiscal Studies was saying about what women of prime working age now comprise in the workforce. It's almost identical to men. Times are changing. There is an absolute business imperative to reflect the communities we serve. And I think acknowledging that and then ensuring that we have more women in senior leadership, that becomes a business imperative, right? I have some ideas. I think that last year I became an MD at Marsh. I had to work quite hard for that. And one of the things that came up was that I think women were being judged differently, and I think this is the same across all organisations, on certain characteristics. So first you've got the leadership criteria, which we have to fit into. But then I think that generally women, characteristics that are seen as good, strong leadership characteristics for men, you know, confident, ambitious, hardworking, aren't always seen as the same in women, where you can be seen as too confident, too driven, too difficult. So I think that there is a need to look at how we are judging women that we are trying to get into leadership roles. I think that they can often be a lack of support. So you need to be able to see women at the top. It's almost chicken and egg, right? And I think that it is important for all of us, particularly people who are in positions where they can influence leadership within their business, to think about this and the ways in which they can improve this. And cheekily, we had a balance event here the other day, our gender event, and I asked this question as a cheat, knowing that I was going to be here. And somebody made a good point that they thought that there was also just a failure to take account of women when we're dealing with succession planning in companies. So we're not being thought of at that stage, particularly at the very top, where they're thinking about who will become the next leaders. And so I think it is important, again, particularly for our business leaders, to start thinking at an early stage, what does our female talent pipeline look like? What do we want in terms of female leadership? And then to plan our way to that. Hopefully that's quick fire enough.
That's great. And I think, so many good tips and things in there. So anyone who didn't catch it, I think there'll be a recording afterwards. I'd go back with your notebook or your fancy AI note taker or whatever it is you use nowadays. All right, so coming to, we've talked about that retention piece, we've talked about the culture piece, we've talked about that leadership and progression piece, and how do we get there? And I think that sort of journey towards it, through sponsorship, mentorship. It'd be great to hear about some examples about these leadership development programs that we have in place that are sort of helping to close that gender gap. I know you've probably all got a lot to say on this, but I'm just looking at the screen and I don't think Simon has spoken in a while, so I don't want him to get left out, and I will sort of jump around. So Simon, it'd be good to hear about your sort of mentorship, sponsorship, leadership programs.
Yeah, thanks, Gillie. I've worked in financial services and insurance for quite some time. So since the late 90s, I've seen quite an evolution in this space. So the way that I think you asked the question is what's helped close the gap. I need to emphasize that my answers will be things that have helped the gap. That does not mean that work is done. I need to emphasize that there is so much more that needs to be done, but I'll focus on those things that sort of have helped close the gap. And to start with, kind of the leadership programs. So when I first started working in the city in financial services, I actually was participating in leadership training programs that were actually widening the gap, if anything, rather than narrowing the gap. And, some of the training that I did years ago was very much geared to the skills that an organisation at that point in time felt that they wanted to foster in their leadership team. And those were very much male traits. They were things that they wanted to bring out, which was pretty unpleasant. And so things like dominance, aggression that go past being assertive. And there was one particular module that I was part of was really about how do you intimidate someone in a meeting to gain the upper hand. And that didn't feel acceptable back in the late 90s, and certainly won't get anywhere near a training course now. So I have seen things move in a positive direction, and things that I think are much more that have helped in that direction are, emphasising that an organisation wants to bring out different traits, that the diversity is needed in terms of gender, in terms of different skills, because an organisation, if it has that, it really outperforms its peers. So things like insights training, where it helps an organisation recognise whether they've got the right balance, I think are really, really helpful. I think that having leadership and development programs that are accessible to different genders as well is helpful. So there needs to be equal representation on these programs. One of the things that we've got in AXA XL is what's called a Leadership Advisory Council. And that's a committee that sits below the actual global leadership team, where they help the leadership team reach decisions on certain topics. There's a lot of empowerment there, but a central fundamental principle of getting on that program, it has to be diverse. It has to represent all different characteristics, and so that really helps do that. That's leadership. In terms of mentorship, I think that this can really help play a positive role. I mentioned earlier, one of the best leaders I had, and for 6 years was a female CEO. She was dedicated really to bringing people in the organisation, create an environment where people could thrive, regardless of whether they were male, female, whether they were introvert, extrovert. It was really identifying talent, identifying appetite, and bringing that through. And that really inspired me to act myself as a mentor. And so we have mentorship programs in AXA XL in the UK. We also have reverse mentorship, which help provide sort of more junior team members reverse mentor more senior members, and that really helps grow the network. It helps them get more confident in their skills. And then I think lastly, sponsorships. I mentioned it earlier, so I won't cover it too much, but the employee resource groups, and I was nodding to what Hal was saying earlier. It can't be someone who's just in there just to tick a box, because like Hal said, you can sniff it a mile off. The best ones are the ones where there's absolute, they're embodying it and they're living it and they believe it, because if it's not so authentic, you can know that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, I just want to sort of touch back on that sort of male ally piece. And clearly, you've got such a great attitude and energetic approach when it comes to being a male ally. What role do you see that ally piece becoming as we move forward, and those gaps that we still haven't closed? Any advice for male allies on how they can really make a difference moving forward?
Yeah. Sort of get involved and act as a mentor is one of the things that I've found really good. So, the empirical evidence is that organisations with a diverse workforce and with diverse, opportunities, they way outperform others, and so it's the benefits are absolutely clear. But I think trying to ensure that they're living those values, that they embody them, but also participate in these programs. You get, I've one of the advice I give to new people coming into the industry is just try and do as many things as you can, because you find things that interest you, you find things that take you in a direction that you didn't expect, but you're not going to find those things out if you don't participate. And so the advice that I would always give is get involved, and there's no, there's not much that's more rewarding than seeing people really flourish and really grow when they've got someone championing their cause and making them aware of opportunities, and you being almost their sponsor, their mentor through the organisation, and you seeing them take advantage of those opportunities.
Participate. I think that's the message, and that sort of reminder that bringing someone up is not taking something from you. It's not a zero-sum game. It's a pleasure and it's a joy to help people, and you'll sort of take ownership and help them take ownership of themselves as well. I'm seeing Hal nodding like crazy, and I'm wanting to make sure we've got enough time for all of your closing remarks and any questions that are coming in. So, popping some practical recommendations now, which I promised earlier. How do we connect with the people that are not in the room? And I think, Hal, you've talked about a very energetic journey, gathering lots of information, lots of skills, lots of people. So I'd love to hear from you about, how do we engage those allies and get them to be as energetic as you are?
Yeah. And I was, as always, nodding. I think it doesn't just have to be formal mentorship, and something that I always try and do is just make time for younger people within the business. And I think that was because, senior people made time for me maybe when I was coming at the early part of my career. And you touched on it, Gillie. It doesn't have to be just young women, young men, trying to, I'm still 15 years into the market and still super enthusiastic about it. I think, I was reflecting on what others have been saying. I think it can be quite easy as a senior leader, a senior male leader, to kind of be passionate about this. You know, you've made it, your career is super successful. I think it's harder as you're trying to build your career, because maybe you are in the back of your mind going, well, you know, I'm in competition with that person for that next job, right? But the way I've always seen it is, I know roughly in my mind, I don't want to be, you know, CEO Greg Case. It doesn't have to worry about me, CEO of Aon, right? So I've always said to young people that I'm mentoring, what I really want to see is in the future you to be my boss. And I genuinely mean that. Like, I would love it if there was someone that I've mentored in the last 10 years who in 10 years time is running a department that I'm working in. That would be, for me, one of the greatest achievements of my career. I think we've talked about the squeezed middle, sort of pivoting slightly. I think senior leaders almost need to insist that middle management are engaged on this topic. You know, I think if the senior leaders are engaged and are explaining to middle managers why it's important, you will see a better engagement from the middle management. One very practical piece of advice I always say is, when a senior leader is going to an event or is an executive sponsor, and they're emailing out to, you know, maybe 100, 200 people in their personal org, do not get your PA to do it. It has to come from you, so that your people within your people org know you are attending that event, know that you are passionate about that event. Not, oh, I've given this to my PA to send out because it's, you know, I've got to do that. That's part of what I have to do as an exec sponsor. So I'm really, really big on that. You know, we implemented something in the gender network about bring a friend. You know, try and grab someone who isn't, you know, people in this room already. Try and grab someone who maybe is, you know, testing the waters, has asked a question about something, and bring them along to the event. And I think within that, we have to remember everyone's at a different stage of their journey, you know, so there are going to be people who aren't, you know, who haven't read loads of books about gender and, you know, how that affects the workplace and then personally. And there are going to be people further down the scale, right? But I think we as people who are passionate about these topics, it is partly incumbent on us, but I also do believe it's incumbent on others to educate themselves. So there's that balance. But yeah, I do think if you can grab someone, do that, you know, and I mean, you know, literally just grab them, put it into a no, none of that. Thank you, Gillie.
No, I think that's great. And yeah, I'll throw that out to our audience listening, wherever you are. This time next year, we should have double the attendees at Dive-In. So that is your challenge. And yeah, I do think that authentic communication that comes from you. We're humans. We should communicate to each other like humans. And again, it comes back to Leslie's point about that culture being 10 foot wide, that it's who are you having an interaction with, not getting a message filtered down from somewhere else. And while I mentioned Leslie, perhaps you have some recommendations that are practical that people can do to engage that wider group.
Well, I'm gonna steal Hal's idea of bringing a friend policy. I think that's a great idea. But one thing that I think that we can all do, everybody who is on this call can do something. We can start some conversations. So we can come out of this session, we can have a chat to our friends, our colleagues, we can post something on LinkedIn to say something that we learned. There's certainly loads of nuggets that I've picked up already, because conversations really do shift mindsets and they really do drive action. So if I don't know about something, if I haven't been introduced to an idea, I'm missing out. We can all help introduce people to new ideas and get them thinking differently. So I think it's a case of sharing what we've learned or what we found interesting. And then there's some more formal things around. We could speak to our comms teams, get something on the intranet, share my story, and everybody can go back to their employee resource groups, share things and try and get them involved as well. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to even just share something with one person.
Yeah, and I think it's that ripple effect. The small actions can make a big difference. You don't know if someone's new starting in the office and you tell them about your employee resource group and they think, wow, I feel welcome here, and actually now I'm going to get involved. I've made a friend, it's all, and they go home and they go, my job's great. I've met some really great people. Like, it's just that ripple effect is huge. So I think never underestimate the small actions, because that's what culture is. You can't just have a list of rules and that's how everyone behaves. You can't dictate those values, but you can encourage that camaraderie, that engagement, that inclusion piece. So yeah, small actions as your practical tips. All right, so where are we wanting to leave some time for questions, but I'd love to hear from you all, sort of a closing reflection on any other actionable steps, anything else that you missed throughout this conversation that will drive meaningful change. So for the people listening at home who are thinking, these are all amazing examples and ideas, but I don't know where to start, what advice would you give them? And I am just sort of keeping an eye on everyone we've sort of spoken to. And Yetunde, I haven't heard from you in a while, so I'd love to start with you on your sort of practical advice on where people can start to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, the things that Leslie and Hal have said, about bringing a friend, having those conversations, posting things on LinkedIn. I think for me, sort of sidestepping slightly from those things is to think about why you're doing this, to think about your motivations in doing all of these things. I think, look, most of us can probably see through sort of tokenistic gestures and people doing things because they think it's the right thing to do, and actually what people really want to see is genuine sort of committed action. Don't just do this today, don't just do this on International Women's Day, but think about how you personally, how do you show up every day for the sake of gender inclusion and inclusion generally in your organization. So I would say, look, be intentional, because progress in this area isn't going to happen by accident. It's not going to happen just by the way. It's going to be as the result of everybody making little concerted effort every single day. As I said, be committed. Don't just sort of jump on a bandwagon because it's the sort of the flavor of the month, and then next month you sort of lost interest. There are people who are living these identities every single day. They can't take a day off from this. It doesn't end for them. They live in it every single day. And lastly, I would say be brave. Be willing to do unconventional things. One of the things that Gallagher has done that I have been a huge beneficiary of is the Amplify program, which is done in conjunction with an external organisation, and it has been massive for the organisation. It targets emerging female leaders, so more junior women in the organisation. It's very, very unconventional style of leadership development, but it has paid dividends, massively for the business. So, be willing to take a chance and perhaps try something different.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you so much. And great, glad we got to hear about that programme as well. Simon, I'm going to come to you next. What advice would you give for people wanting to make a difference but don't know where to start?
I think you already said it earlier, Gillie, in response to my question. It's just participate. Whether that's mentorship, whether it's sponsorship, just go ahead and get involved in as many things that you can and try and make a real difference, because there's a lot still to do.
Yeah, and I think it's like Leslie said, ask those questions, speak to your leaders. The more people ask those questions, the more you give that feedback and engagement, people can't ignore it, right? So it's be loud and be brave, as Yetunde said. Leslie, coming to you next.
Well, I take a very logical approach to these things. I've got a change management background, and I think if I want to implement change, I start working out what my scope is. Do I want to change me? Do I want to change my organisation? Do I want to change the children at my local school or my team? And then once I'm clear about that, then I'll start to think about some data. So where are the inequalities showing up? Is it a particular, if it was your organisation, is it a particular team? Is it a particular role? Is it leadership levels? Is it the pay gap? What problem are you trying to solve before you can start to work out what the solutions are? And I think if it, for example, was the number of women in your underwriting team, then you're starting to look at your HR life cycle. Are your job specs attracting the right people? Are you promoting fairly? Do the panels do they lack diversity? one of the things in our industry we've got to be so careful about is pre-meetings, coffee meetings before we decide to interview people. Everybody who's got a friend can have a coffee meeting with the person who's interviewing, and the people who are outside the industry don't have that access to that extra information before they go for the job. So I think you just have to get the scope right, work out what problem you're trying to solve, then dive deeply into what the root causes are. And that's going to give you the ideas about what you can change. And if you can't change them directly, then tap into your network, tap into your employee resource group. At Lloyd's, I co-chaired the gender group at one point, and the biggest impact we had was through external benchmarking. So as a group, we used to externally benchmark the experience for women at Lloyd's. And because it was external input, it had a lot of science behind it. If you tweak this and if you offer that, then it's really going to up your game as a business in terms of experience for women. And the senior leaders liked that because of the evidence base behind it. So there's different ways within your organisation you can make a change. And then I'm going to plug again for those primary school children. If anybody out there wants to just do something, going into your local primary school and showing them a different kind of role model for like a female role is just hugely important. If anybody hasn't seen that, the YouTube video, Redraw the Balance, I'd encourage you to watch it because it is terrifying. The thought patterns that are ingrained by the time children are 7 about what is a woman's job and what is a man's job. And we've just got to somehow help disrupt those patterns.
Yeah, absolutely. So get the facts, get the data, get involved, get into your communities. And I really love the point you made about taking the emotion out of things like hiring process, because while we want to build that culture, that community, that connection, we have to be aware that our unconscious biases are unconscious. And it's very hard to tackle those. Even if you tell someone they have one, they can't see it. It's invisible. That's how it works. So by challenging yourself to have those processes will enable that progression and that equal playing field. Hal, I know you're going to give me some no nonsense advice for our audience today. So what would you recommend?
Yeah, thanks, Gillie. I would say educate yourself. It's not always incumbent on the minority group, the black woman in the room, to educate you on what they're experiencing. You need to go and do that if you're in the privileged position, perhaps, that I am as a white cisgendered male. And coming to that, I think men also, white men, middle-class men in the market need to learn when to shut their mouths, because often in a meeting I can get a bit overexcited and sort of think, oh, I've got this great point, but actually I crowd out other people. And I think that has been one of the biggest skills that I've tried to learn for myself and would encourage others to learn, is shut your mouth.
I love that one. And yeah, it's a huge part of the coaching work that I do is like, can you leave a 10-second gap after someone's finished speaking before you say something? So there's a tip I challenge anyone to do in a meeting is just count for 10 seconds and see what else comes from the room or even from the silence, actually. Karen, I'd love to come to you for some final points.
How we drive meaningful change is something that I've thought about for a very long time. Is a real kind of keen interest of mine. And in the end, I kind of distilled it down to holding myself accountable. Come to these events, go to your balance events, do dive in, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, when I wake up in the morning and look in the mirror, what am I doing to drive meaningful change? What actions am I taking? And so accountability, I think, is key, because it's too easy to look at the bigger picture and just think this is too much, right? Whereas actually, if we look at what we have around us, what we can do. So, for example, I'm a great fan of informal mentoring, right? Can we help people around us? Thinking deliberately about who we identify as talent. What can we do to them? Can we make an introduction to somebody? If you're a manager, how are you going to help with the progress of female talent? What opportunities are available? For example, I talked about secondments earlier. Secondments are a brilliant way to get experience. Get out and get a secondment and help others in doing those things and setting yourselves some personal targets. So not necessarily trying to change the world, that would be nice, but really focusing on the parts of the world that we can change. And for me, that's absolutely critical. And I think if I look back over time, I can think about who I helped last week and what I think that will do and how that will assist their career. And I think it is, if we really care about this, I think individual accountability is absolutely key.
Absolutely. And I think, just hearing from all of you, it really is such a balance, isn't it? Which is life. We want that go out, get action, be brave, as Yetunde said, but also, like Hal said, know when to stop, know when to be quiet. It is that just measure of finding a sensible approach. Well, it's just, I think we could probably all be here all day, but I'm sure people have a lot of work to get on with. We do have one question that's come up in the chat while we've been chatting away. And I'll sort of leave it open to the floor to answer. But it says, I'm a female parent who wants to succeed and progress, but without having to pretend that I don't have children. How can I help my leader see my skills and not my gender? Lots of thoughtful faces. So feel free.
I'm just a bit worried about that question because there's obviously in that situation, the person feels like the gender is the first thing that's being seen, and I think that I don't know. It's just making me think about imposter syndrome and how people always thought it was the person's fault. Actually, it sounds like this is an unhealthy environment where they're in a situation where they're being made to feel like their gender's the key thing. If I think about Asta, our exec team come in late because they're taking their children to school. They leave at 3 o'clock to pick them up. There's people all over the business going to gym days, or it's just not seen as a thing. So I think there's something around the environment that the person who's asked that question is in, and in terms of how people can see your skills. That's quite a big question. The first thing that springs to mind is it's very easy for people to see this job that you can do right now because that's what you're doing every day. But lots of people in the panel have said great ideas about secondments, about doing a leadership program, about going on to a panel or volunteering to support culture surveys or whatever. You can show your skills in different ways to different people within the business so that you're at the front of mind when people are talking about who might be the next person to give an opportunity to.
And I'd absolutely say don't, it's the concerning question, and don't feel alone there. It's like, why doing that? Like having those wider conversations, explore your policies, explore what other people think about this and the support that's there for you. But if anyone else on the panel wanted to come back on that one.
Can I brief? I'm sorry. I was just going to briefly,
Karen, you go.
Very briefly add to that, which is just going back to the point that I made about, points of difference being your superpower. We're almost talking about gender in a negative light, whereas actually it is just one part of you that you're bringing into work. And I separate that slightly from your skills. Your skills are different. What are the things? What are your strengths? What are the things that you bring to your role that you say assist you in that role and wherever you want to go next? So I'd agree with Leslie. I think that you made some great points. I think that at Marsh, for example, we have lots and lots of senior female leaders, and they manage to combine the personal and the professional really well. And I think one of the things I mentioned, mentoring, it may be that person would benefit, if they don't have one already, from a mentor, because that will kind of help them as they kind of try and navigate some of these quite difficult issues.
Absolutely. Hal, did you want to?
Yeah, it's been mentioned already by someone on the panel, but not starting the team meeting until 9:30. I think it was Leslie. I actually have 2 young daughters, one of whom I drop at nursery often when I come into the city. And I had to sit my manager down, who perhaps is slightly from a different generation, hadn't thought about it. It was unconscious. He wasn't doing it on purpose, but saying, when I'm doing drop off, the earliest I'm going to get to the office is 9:15, so I cannot attend a 9 o'clock meeting. So I suppose it's incumbent on managers to try and think about that, and maybe incumbent on those of us who do have parenting responsibilities to call it, to be a bit brave and say, this isn't working for me, I need a change. Easier if you're in a supportive environment, as Leslie said, maybe there's something in the culture piece here, but I wonder as well if, as the market changes, I hope, fingers crossed, and more men are doing some of those caring responsibilities that historically have been done by women, we will see more, balance. I am one of those men, I do drop off and I leave at 4 o'clock to then go and do pickup. I'm trying to embody the person that I want and the change that I want to see. So it's, I think there's something in there about being brave and just saying, this isn't working, this is the change I need.
And I think it's that they call it leave loudly, isn't it? No, don't do it. Don't do it on the sly. Let everyone know that's why you're leaving, and it's fine. And I'll get the work done. And I'm trusted on my output to do the job when it works. Great. I think we have time for one more question that's come up, and it's quite a biggie. So let's go. What's the biggest thing a leader can do to make their organization and teams more inclusive?
Can I will kick us off. Not sure
Thanks,
I'm going to come up with the biggest thing. But one of the things I mentioned, I think, or had in my mind when I was looking at this, I think managers are absolutely key to pretty much everything in terms of career trajectory, progress. It's often your managers, your first sort of port of call for any new promotion projects that'll come up, promotions, etc. I think it's really difficult to overstate the importance of a good manager. So I think looking at how managers are helping in terms of achieving, whether it's gender parity or other forms of equality, I think is really important. And I do think it's a combination. I think when I was thinking about this, I know there's sort of a back and forth, possibly across all industries, about whether you put things like KPIs on a manager so that they are effectively judged upon and remunerated according to how they are handling these particular issues and dealing with progress and making sure there's balance there. Some may like that, some may not, but that is one way that you could do it. But I think equally as important is sort of changing hearts and minds, really. Even if you put it in KPIs, if people don't want to do these things, it's never going to happen. And I honestly think that again is through dialogue. So, if you go to what I think Simon was saying about getting involved, say, if you're a man, I much as I love talking to women at gender events, I'm a bit tired of rocking up and seeing a room with the sort of 99% women. So actually talking to the men in your lives and at home and all the rest of it about how they can help in this regard, I think will also make an absolutely enormous difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think for me, it's being vulnerable. That's one of the biggest things a leader can do is to be vulnerable themselves and know it's okay to get it wrong and share their struggles, because then you're letting other people know it's okay too. And if you don't, it'll bottle up, it'll come out somewhere else. So don't be afraid of it. Anyone else want to jump in on that? I think we have about 5 minutes before they cut the feed on us. Leslie, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think one of the single biggest things that a leader could do is incorporate it within their decision making for key strategic decisions. So I'll give you a very quick example of when I was at Lloyd's. I was a member of the Business Opportunities Committee, which does the kind of Dragon's Den review the pitches for people who want to join the market. And there was a massive change when we decided to incorporate diversity as a key metric for new businesses that were coming into the market. Suddenly, people who had been coming in and saying, oh, we're just going to do the same thing that we did over there, just didn't cut it anymore. It was, how are you going to build a diverse team with diverse perspectives? And actually, it was a real requirement. It wasn't just a tick box. So that made a massive difference because the new entrants suddenly realised they needed to pay attention to it. And another strategic example would be your performance review ratings. If part of the process is doing that check against gender, ethnicity, social mobility, whatever it is, the things, if that's part of your process, then you're forced to think about it and really challenge yourself. So I think every time you make a big strategic decision for the business, just making sure you've looked at it from different perspectives, get different opinions, and takes on it, that can shift your own mindset, I think.
Yeah, I'm hearing accountability is the biggest thing that you can do. All right, I think we have sort of 3 minutes left, so I'm not sure if anyone has anything they want to say super speedily.
Can I say something super speedily?
Go, Karen.
I just sort of looked at Slido, and there's a question around how, and I can generalize this out for people, how as women of color we've conquered the industry. And I can generalize that out because I think it's easy to look at people and think, oh my goodness, how did you manage this when you are who you are? And honestly, I think we were talking about, there's linear careers and then my career, which has been like that and a bit round and round. And don't be, you can be inspired, but don't be disheartened. Like I always say, I make a very good mentor because I've made every mistake possible, right? If there is a mistake to be made, I've made it at some point in my career. And so I think it's made it easier for me to then kind of share those with others. So I would say, be brave, take opportunities as they come up, try and seek guidance, and talk to the people who you think have conquered. And I think you'll be surprised at some of the stories that they have to tell about how they've got to where they are.
Absolutely perfect. And again, it ties into that vulnerable piece. Like, no, if you haven't made mistakes, you're not going to learn how to handle them. So it's that resilience piece. It's be brave. It's take action. Have those conversations. I'm sure this panel are willing for people reaching out for any advice, or if you see them walking around the city, you can say hello. But I suppose it just leaves me to say thank you all so much for your contribution, your discussion this morning, and thanks to Dive In for having us. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you very much. It's been brilliant.
Thanks, Gillie.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.